There we go. Boom. That says I'm live, so I must be live. I'm going to turn down the sensitivity once again. There we go. That should sound a little bit better. Good to see everyone. Let me just turn the camera over here a little bit more. Good to see everyone. I hope you're having a good week. I'm feeling better today. I'll tell you, I wasn't feeling great yesterday. I wasn't feeling terrible, but yeah, I got my second vaccination shot on Friday afternoon. So I spent most of the day yesterday just sort of sleeping pretty much. I had a mild fever. I got the Moderna vaccine because I got it at work. Pretty much this morning woke up, was back to normal, and just got to wait, I guess, for about 2 weeks now for it to be fully kicked in. But then I'll be fully vaccinated. I suppose that's good news, but at the same time, of course, pretty scary seeing how the Delta variant in particular is ripping through Tokyo at the moment. I'll talk about that a little bit more tonight. But here and everywhere else, including places with a lot of vaccinations, clearly it's not going to stop you getting it. It's just going to make it more mild if you get it. It's the fork hands, right? It takes away COVID's forks from its hands. So it can't do as much damage, which looks like it's worth it. I mean, the numbers in places like UK and Israel show that, it certainly cuts down on hospitalizations. But it also shows that you can still catch it. You can even still get a bad case of it. You can even end up in hospital from it. The chances are a lot less, but it still is there. So, it's kind of bringing back the reality now that vaccines aren't the end of this, unfortunately. I get the feeling you're not going to get mask protests in Tokyo the way that you do in America, because it's already part of sort of culture here that people would wear masks whenever it's hay fever season or if they have a cold or something like that. So I think, and plus, there is, although of course there are people who go around with them around their chins and so on, and people who don't. Most people, you go around and there is that social stigma of not wearing them. So I think in Tokyo, masks are pretty much here to stay. I mean, for me, it's, you feel undressed going out without it. So, it's hard to say how this is going to, actually end now. Well, certainly Japan is still a long way from being fully vaccinated as well in terms of like just what's going on right now. By the way, I recommend once again, I just watched this evening, he put up a new video yesterday. I think it's basically on that sort of a cycle. In fact, I think he said it was for August 11. So actually maybe it was a few days ago. I watched it yesterday or today. Ninja Monkey, he does great weekly updates. If you're interested in traveling to Japan and wondering when Japan's going to be open again and want to get the latest information, not just on how vaccinations and how COVID cases are, but also, all the sort of talk and rumors around opening up specifically, he's just focusing purely on that, and he puts together information and presents it really well on his channel. So I do recommend check out Ninja Monkey. The guy is British, I think, and lives in Gibraltar. But yeah, he's just got a great channel with Japan information. I mean, he might as well be living here. So I highly recommend that. But we're still sitting tight here. The situation is just getting worse, as it is, of course, in other parts of the world that I'm looking at. It's weird to be looking at New Zealand, where there isn't where New Zealand's COVID-free at the moment, but through locking everything down. Other stuff going on. Before I go in and say hello, I suppose I should, I don't talk about personal stuff very often, but yeah, I had a sad bit of news yesterday. My grandmother in New Zealand, I grew up with both my grandfathers were dead before I was born, so I knew my Australian grandmother for a few years, and I remember her pretty well. She was around till I was about 6, but my New Zealand grandmother, she was getting close to 100. She would have been 100 on November 1st. She passed away yesterday. She had a great innings. I mean, in a way, of course it's sad, but at the same time, I just think I was really fortunate that, of course, she was the only grandparent I really got to know, and I got to spend a lot of time with whenever I went. When I went down to New Zealand to get admitted to the bar, I stayed with her. I love going down to Christchurch, just even on my own when I was a kid, to hang out with her. To me, she is my Christchurch connection. Of course, I've got an uncle and an aunt down there as well. But she, man, wow. I mean, I just feel really lucky to have those genes. It wasn't corona, by the way. It was RS, which is actually Respiratory syndrome is something typically kids and elderly get. It goes around every year, and it's been worse this year in Japan because everyone was so careful last year, and as a result it sort of has come back a bit stronger, and more kids are being affected by it this year, and this is the case in New Zealand. But I suppose I can't really say it was a shock. It was something I just look at that. My grandmother was super cool. I mean, she grew up in the mountains in New Zealand. I did the genealogy thing for a long time, and when I realized that, she grew up, born, 1922? 1921, actually. She was born in 1921 in Queenstown, but near Queenstown, there was no electricity, there were no cars, there was literally in the mountains, riding horses and stuff like that. It was like a 19th century sort of lifestyle in a really harsh part of New Zealand. It's amazing she lived as long as she did, and she was always just really, really solid and cool. And it's funny, I always took it as a compliment when family members from my Australian side who met her and said, "Oh, now I get you," the people sort of see parts of me in her, which I always thought was really, really cool. So yeah, it's a big shame, of course, I won't be able to go down to New Zealand for the funeral or anything like that, but my grandma was very, very cool, and I'm very proud to think that I try to take after her. And who knows, maybe they can get YouTube where she is now. But anyway, that was something that happened yesterday. I just acknowledge, I don't acknowledge my personal stuff, but I had a super cool grandma, and she had an amazing innings. So shout out on that. Who is here in the comments? We've got Dan H. Good to see you, Dan H. Quint Rank. Good to see you. Good evening. We've got AV84 Chaos. Shubis is very excited that you're on time. I don't, listen, I really, you can be on time anytime during the week, Shubis, but very, very cool to have you here. I'm as excited as you are. AV84K, I think I just said before, Mr. Cordy Chap, Sergeant Bilko. Good to see you. Good to see everybody. AV84K, I don't know why your butter test got caught there by that algorithm, but never mind. I can still moderate to fix that stuff. There we go. It's not working well this week. 2270 AJ. I'm good. How are you? I'm feeling a lot better than yesterday anyway. Today, of course, by the way, End of War Day. The commemoration of the 76th anniversary of the end of World War II. So that's another thing going on today in Japan. Tokyo 503, hi from the drenched and chilly Japan archipelago. Indeed, I don't actually have any specific news stories on this, but as Tokyo 503 pointed out, just incredible. It's like rainy season, like times 10 at the moment. We're past rainy season technically, but there has been that weather system that goes all the way over to China, just like a front that's just parked, a warm front that's parked. Particularly, it extends from Kyushu all the way to Tokyo, but all the rain flows from west to east, so it's particularly hitting Kyushu and Hiroshima and places like that at the moment. And definitely stay safe, and a tough time, of course, with the pandemic as well, to be thinking about things like evacuation. But if you've got to evacuate like in Japan. You don't mess with things like floods. There's so many rivers, there's so many hills. We've seen what landslides, the sort of damage that they can do, that they are deadly in this country. Even in big urban places. Hiroshima had a particularly bad one a few years ago. Shizuoka just a few weeks ago. So, don't mess around with that stuff. But indeed, very wet and chilly at the moment. Boom indeed, Quinn Ranked. Ada Void, good morning. Good to have you back here. Buttering, yabba dabba do. Good to, yes indeed, Shivas. Very glad that you can be here this early in the morning. Kubaras Tenshi, good to see you. We've got Andrew Moboye, good to see you. Second Pfizer jab Thursday, just before the last one, so one more week before we can go back to the gym. Yeah, it's funny, they're not actually prescribing specifically that stuff about exercise here, but I've heard the cases from Singapore, and I mean, Moderna seems to be a bit different to Pfizer. They only told me, don't do exercise for a day. Last time on the first shot, I didn't exercise for a week. I'll probably go back to jogging lightly from about a week from now, but I'll keep an eye on that. But then 2 weeks and I should be fully charged. I should be receiving full 5G reception. I'm looking forward to it. Who else we got in here? We've got Lysander 45, excellent, from quarantine in Osaka. Well, congratulations making it to Osaka. And that's very, very cool. We've got, who else we got in here? We've got Odie Jr., we've got Butter Butter Boom. Yes, I like that very much. Shrippet, good to see you, Shrippet. Glad that you're feeling better after the second shot. Can ask for a refresher from the 20th of August here in Hungary. Shrippet, good to have someone from Hungary. I've got well, technically from Serbia, I think, but Hungarian from Novi Sad, stepfather. So yeah, very cool to have someone from Hungary there in the comments, and congrats on getting the second shot. What sort of shots are they using in Hungary, by the way? Is that all Pfizer down there? I'm just kind of curious. Does Ninja Monkey have brothers Donnie, Leo, and Raph? I have no idea what you're talking about, AV84K. That's totally over my head, but yeah, I don't know. It's a cool channel. I would definitely recommend subscribing to it. Go check that out. Sainted Sir is 9:40 a.m. in New York. Good to have you, Sainted Sir. And yes, East Coast. I guess it's not so bad for East Coast at the moment. So yeah, indeed, good to have you in the chat, and thank you for letting me know what time it is. It's always good to know that. Kerberos Tenshi. Yeah, the butter shortage situation actually hasn't been that bad this year, I think. Who knows? It could be the pandemic. Who knows? Yeah, thanks, Andrea Molboy. And yeah, like I say, it's not. It wasn't sudden, and it wasn't sort of unforeseen. But well, I mean, again, just thinking again, what was really cool. She was lucid and actually pretty active until like about a year ago. She had a great run. I mean, like I say, I hope I can take after her. It's it's sad, but at the same time, maybe it's the way I'm wired from moving house so much as a kid. I tend to look optimistically as I move on, and I think with her, I think you talk about a life to be celebrated. My grandma just had an amazing life, so to me, I'm more in that sort of a mode. I think that's just the way I interpret and deal with these things. But yeah, thank you for the sympathies, and indeed. Matriarch of Yuko Simon. Yeah, thanks, OD Jr. I do appreciate that. Yeah, she was nearly 100, almost got there, and and it's silly to think that to want to get on there, if it wasn't her time to get all the way there, but at the same time it would have been kind of a thing. In Japan, it's increasingly common to get to 100. In New Zealand, it's still pretty rare. And it's funny, I did connect with someone else doing the family tree thing, and it turns out that, on her side of the family, like everyone makes it to 100. So if people say that I look like her, or they see her genes in me, I'm like, good, I'll take those. So yeah, it's a good thing. I mean, I think it's a celebration of life more than anything else for me. Papa Power, good to see you. She indeed did. Yeah. Did my son meet her? Asked Dan H. Yes, he did. We got down to New Zealand. We got down to Christchurch, and he did get to meet her. I wouldn't say got to know her very well, and he was pretty small, but got to meet her a couple of times, actually. So, yeah, I was glad about that. We would have gone down there, again, of course, at the end of the year, if it weren't for the situation, of course, that we can't get into New Zealand. But that is what it is. Yeah. No, but I think we were lucky to get down there. Ninja Monkey, Monkey, all as one word. Not finding that it's not Ninja Mikey, it's Ninja Monkey. Not sure if there's a joke here that I'm missing, but yes, I'll write it down in the comments right now. Ninja Monkey, and I do recommend it if you're interested in traveling to Japan and want to know when you'll be able to travel again. It's the perfect channel for it. So yeah, I recommend it. Quickly going down, one John-san, good to see you, indeed, good to have you in here. Gilded Nerd, howdy. Barry Convex, good to see you in there as well. Sputnik, you got the Sputnik one. I was wondering that's why, but I must admit, that was partly why I was asking. But there's Hog Foils and Arms. There's a great Irish sort of comedy skit channel, which just everything they put up is funny, and they actually recently put up a video of, all the vaccines get together and have a party. And I don't know, everyone's sort of standoffish about Sputnik, but fact is, I mean, the Russians have a lot of smart people, so I'm actually, and it seems to be as effective as AstraZeneca anyway. So yeah, I think there's a lot of politics that come into people holding off that. So yeah, that's good stuff, and again, congrats on getting vaccinated. Yeah. I think we're nearly caught up. Remember, say hello. Do as everybody does. I say this every week. Say my name. Doesn't have to even have the @ mark for it to highlight. You can just do Echo Simon and it will pop up orange. And if it pops up orange, I will acknowledge, and I will try to catch it. I always scroll back after every story. I will say hello, and yeah, feel free. Ask me for topics, ask me questions, make comments if you want to get my attention. If you just want to say hello, I really do love just knowing who's here in the comments and getting to say hello. I think it's part of the fun of doing it live. So yeah, sure. But after a week, I was fluent in Russian. I love that. Oh, they manufacture it in Serbia. Okay, well, that's interesting. Yeah. That's ice hockey improved. Yeah, I would start playing chess. I would try chess. But yeah, very good. So look, say hello. For me, it's the thrill of the show, getting to see, particularly when there are people who haven't spoken up before. So don't be shy, do that. And with that, we are 10:49. Wow. Okay, so 10 minutes to get through the first two topics. I've kind of assigned them randomly tonight. It's been kind of quiet this week. I was busy with work, and then I got the shot. I've kind of been low-key on Twitter. So yeah, let's go through the stories. Boom. First story we've got tonight is Suga. We finished the Olympics, and in the middle of the Olympics, of course, the situation got a lot worse with COVID numbers. Pardon me. And yeah, throughout that, basically the Prime Minister just kind of appearing, continuing to be doofus in chief. I mean, the fact that on the Hiroshima A-bombing memorial, he mispronounced Hiroshima and A-bomb. He looks, I mean, it's understandable that he would be exhausted, but, he's just not really showing very much leadership. Again, left the nation with the impression that we were going to have the Olympics even at the expense of public health. I think that's actually harsh. We'll talk about this a little bit on another story later on. I think actually the government deserves credit for at least making sure. I think the Olympics were pretty successful at keeping COVID from spreading from the Olympics into the community. But of course, the community was in a terrible situation throughout the Olympics anyway, so it didn't really make that much difference. And it still highlights the fact that, in the end of the day, taxpayers paid tens of billions of dollars on an Olympics, which we weren't allowed to participate in. And that distracted a lot of attention and made it feel like the government had all the wrong priorities. So as a result, the Suga administration is down to a 28% approval rating, which is interesting for reasons I'll go into later, that there is going to be an LDP leadership challenge, i.e. someone else could take over his head as the LDP and hence become Prime Minister in September. Plus there'll be a national election in November. So given that he is heading into numbers that rival some of the least popular prime ministers in cabinets of all time. And this really hinges now on the vaccinations and so on as well. But yeah, they've got no real answer to the increasing numbers again. His popularity is tanking. And that just shows generally people are becoming very cynical about the performance of the government. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see in the next couple of weeks if he can do anything to turn things around. And indeed, at the moment, there's no clear challenges from within the LDP. The main ones that you would think of would be, there have been some rumors that Abe might try for a third time. There are rumors that there's always Ishiba, who's always been standing on the sort of sidelines waiting for his turn. There's also rumors that it might be Taro Kono, the current vaccine minister. Some people doubting he might not go for it this time, but he's been sort of standing by waiting for his chance. So yeah, that said, I think it's a bit like becoming PM of Britain right now. Of UK, it's a bit of a poison chalice, coming in during the pandemic and needing to handle that. It's a bit like handling Brexit, I think. It's something probably people would prefer to wait and take over after it's done. But yeah. Anyway, it's again, the most popular party remains far and away at 42%, none of the above. The most popular opposition party scraping up 6% in spite of, so even 28% looks bad. It's still... they're still doing better than anyone else, which is remarkable. That's the first story. Right now, Mori is rubbing his hands with glee of the thought of there being a worse PM than him, says Lysander 45. You'd think so, except Mori got down to, I think he got down to like single digits. I think he's the only prime minister in history who got down to single digits approval. I mean, I think by the time he resigned, even his mother wouldn't have voted for him. Yeah, Mori was a legendary a legendary screw up as prime ministers go, but yes indeed. Let me just go back and make sure I don't miss all the questions and comments there. Sergeant Bilko, turtles all the way down, all ninjas. I probably missed something there. Thanks, F. Kelly, I appreciate that. Andrea Morboy, your friend flies this coming weekend to Tokyo. She'll be working as a physio for the Aussies at the Paralympics. Oh, well, good for her. We'll talk about the Paralympics a bit later on. Again, if there's any motivation for anyone coming in to comply with the bubble, it's honestly, I'd say everything. The bubble during the Olympics proved to be probably the only safe place in Tokyo. I'm scared to go up to the freaking train station right now. So, yeah, good luck for your friend, but I would definitely stick to the where she's supposed to go and don't go anywhere else. It's a shame she won't get to enjoy Japan. And frankly, I think it's a big question mark over whether they should be proceeding with the Paralympics, even more than with the Olympics. But, yeah, good for your friend. And, again, good luck for the Australian team, I guess, coming in. I mean, the Paralympics themselves are a great thing. So, again, same as with all the other things, nothing against the people involved coming in and the volunteers working for it. But, yeah, definitely tell her to stay safe. And, if she wants to see Tokyo, come back again. That would be the advice. Dan H. The Cuban vaccine, Soberana 2, looks interesting and could help developing countries. Oh, it's interesting. I've not heard of that. It's good to see that there are more coming out. I recall that Vietnam was also developing one as well. I also recall that there was a time that there was actually consideration in some countries talking about actually making the like royalty, making the patents and so on, and the IP rights relating to the Moderna and the mRNA vaccines patent free. And it was actually Bill Gates was among the Bill Gates Foundation sort of lobbied the US government to prevent companies doing this, thinking that there's actually a legitimate argument for not making them sort of free to use, the idea being that companies won't invest in vaccine research if they don't think they can recoup the cost, or they'll spend less on it. But, there's the argument that when this thing was available, they should have just given like the recipe to everybody to just make as much of it as possible. Given that that's not the case, at least with the main Western vaccines, I think it's really great to see that developing countries like Cuba developing ones. So yeah, that's interesting. I'll check that out, and it's good to see. I mean, I suppose yeah, it's complicated with Japan. Japan got AstraZeneca and then decided it didn't want it, so it started donating it everywhere. But then when Tokyo sort of went to hell in the last couple of weeks, they've started saying, okay, we're going to use AstraZeneca in Tokyo, but no one wants to use it. So, yeah, I think it's good to see that there are countries sort of taking things into their own hands. Hiroshima, Mr. Kordychep, is it Hiroshima or Hiroshima? It's actually, yeah, he called it Hiromashi. It was pretty awful. Kita Denshi Taro. Is that how you say that? I'm not sure how to pronounce that. But anyway, Hokuden Shitaro. 彼は話が下手すぎる. Suga, he is definitely terrible at speaking. It's amazing. There aren't many countries where someone with his poor speaking skills could become a prime minister. But yeah, here in Japan, it's kind of nice in a way. Literally anyone can be, it's proof that almost anyone can be prime minister. Scrolling down, lots of comments actually. Greetings and salutations, Robert Brooker. Good to see you once again. Perhaps it's time to recycle an old rap song for COVID's endurance. I think there's some typos there, but who knows? Dan H. would really love it if this causes the LDP to explode and give them the ability to form a new party to come to power. There are so many new parties, though, that all aspire to do that and they all fail. But yeah, it would be interesting to see what happens. So yeah, next story. Unseen Japan. I think I mentioned the first episode of this series. This is going to be a 5-part series, but Unseen Japan, I once again repeat, I've seen people say that they get wound up by the social justice oriented blogs and tweets of the Unseen Japan Twitter channel. But the Noah Oscar, I should have checked. I should have checked before I said it out loud. But the person behind it, they write like really well researched and really good storytelling blogs about really interesting things. Everybody, so many times, so many people, when they start looking at the politics in Japan, people say, why are Japanese people so apathetic about politics? Why aren't young people more liberal and more idealized? And why don't they, believe in challenging power? And, what happened with Japan that no one talks about politics? And why can't you talk about politics at work? Why do I get, hazed if I talk about, if I complain about the LDP at work or something like that? Things like this that come up. If you want to know why, this is a big part of why the United Red Army. This is actually this episode. I knew bits of this, but I didn't know the story at all as well as it was told here in this episode. It's really worth watching. The whole series is worth. There's only 2 episodes up at the moment, but they're long episodes, they're like 30 minutes each. But they talk about, the first episode talks about how the during the security treaty between Japan and the United States after World War II prompted this huge radical political movement in Japan, which had like high school students like assassinating politicians and newspaper editors. It had not just the Communist Party, but a bunch of increasingly radical students and student groups that thought that the communists weren't radical enough. And it went to the point, I mean, this is the whole thing. These groups eventually became so radical and so extreme, they started turning in on each other for not being radical enough, and they sort of murdered each other, although at the same time doing a bunch of bombings and murders and blowing up, airplanes and hijacking planes and blowing up airports in the Middle East and doing all sorts of crazy, horrible, horrific stuff, actually. And yeah, both the story of how like Japan just exploded, literally like Cultural Revolution style within the university campuses, and it led to the universities actually being shut down, and for Japan being in a sort of a quasi-cultural sort of Cultural Revolution kind of civil war. And there were groups that were seriously trying to bring a Chinese Cultural Revolution style violent revolution about in Japan. The second episode of this, the United Red Army, this is when a bunch of the most extreme factions sort of got together in the Red Army. And there's a really famous story that you see lots of documentaries on, which is basically it's considered the last stand of the Red Army, where after a trail of terrorism and so on, the last holdouts, the last extremists sort of went and hijacked a hotel in Nagano. And there's a story about how the police eventually overcame these very dug-in, sort of relatively well-trained sort of extremist terrorists. However, whenever you hear the story about the Nagano hotel siege, you always hear about how, as the police surrounded the hotel, they discovered a sort of, a hut where they found lots of sort of murdered and tortured fellow Japan Red Army members. And these were basically the ones who killed the fellow Red Army members. And then they went to the hotel to mount a last stand. But the police sort of found what they had done to all of their own members. And just showed that they basically sort of turned on each other over a bunch of days and just tortured and killed each other. And that's all that I've ever heard. It was just that they found all these dead bodies, while they were carrying out this siege. And I never heard much about what actually went on, like before the hotel siege. And this second episode here is what happened before the hotel siege. And basically, it's about how the group sort of formed and became more and more extreme, and they joined and they were literally organized like terrorist cells. They were literally looking at violent sort of domestic and in some cases world revolution. And a bunch of them, when they formed, the most extreme groups formed, and they wanted to go up into the mountains to basically do a training and then sort of ideological purification, where they would sort of do a lot of debating and challenging of one another. Part of it was trying to get people to admit their own weaknesses and so on, in order to sort of purify themselves and their dedication to revolution and eliminating counter-revolutionary thoughts. But it turned into basically lynching each other member of the group one by one, and people sort of became afraid one by one of being murdered like the others sort of were. And they were murdered like basically by being forced to stand out in the cold like for 2 days in the snow in the mountains, and they died. Stuff like that. Just basically hazing and bullying by their own group for not being revolutionary enough. Just crazy. And then again, pretty much when all of this came out, apart from the fact that those extreme left-wing groups and their remnants, which came up during the Olympic protests, there was the Chukakuha, there was a member of that came up during the protests in Japan, and the police arrested them for protesting the Olympics. The only person who was actually arrested before the Olympics, at the opening ceremony, was a member of this Chukakuha group who had been sort of hiding underground for decades. But they were from groups like this, which basically they just became known to everybody as assholes. I mean, and they really discredited the whole left-wing movement in Japan. And it's why the Communist Party, which by the way was not extreme enough for these people, so they sort of abandoned it. But they all come across as quite nice people, because frankly they sort of have to, because the people that were around them, I guess you could say that they probably started out with good intentions, But no, they were just basically a lot of overexcited kids who just were crazy and just went way too extreme. And, this is what happened. And it basically meant that it's what makes politics taboo in Japan. And it's really important context to understand. If you're someone like me that loves to talk politics randomly with people, and when you discover that you can't do that in Japan, you wonder why. When you realize that people, particularly people from my manager's sort of generation, like when I was starting out work, people who are 20 years older than me went through this. Yeah, it was crazy stuff. Really, really recommend the series by Unseen Japan on the Red Army. Still 3 episodes to go, 5-episode series, but the first 2 are really good and a bunch of stuff I didn't know. And just context, if you think that Japanese aren't political enough, well, this teaches you that, you don't want them to be political. I've actually heard all sorts of theories that the depoliticization of students in Japan was deliberate and done in the 1970s, partly taking people out of collective dorms, creating like single-person accommodations for students and affordable single-person accommodations. The reason you can get cheap apartments for one person everywhere in Tokyo. I've heard a theory I've not seen supported by evidence that this was actually done deliberately by the government and the construction companies, partly to break up these sort of these dorms where these sort of radical ideas and groups formed. But really had a profound impact on Japan today. That still is affected, so really worth seeing anyway. That's the second story on the Japan Red Army, and highly recommended documentary. Let me go back, see if there's any more comments for me to respond to. So we've got one there from Dan H. The Japanese student movement in the 60s inspired my grandfather's friend Tariq Ali with anti-Vietnam movement within the UK, which, yes, it was very motivated by anti-Vietnam as well. Remember, it actually was motivated as well by the Korean War, where a lot of people in Japan sympathized with North Korea, which they saw as being resistant to American imperialism, and they actually resented the fact that Japan was generating and profiteering from all of the ammunitions and war production for the Korean, for the US, and for the United Nations for supporting South Korea during the Korean War. And that was also targeted violently, as well as US bases were frequently attacked. In fact, this whole episode that this documentary is about was actually triggered by a failed attack on a US base that was protesting the Vietnam War. So yeah, they went all the way with their anti-Vietnam protests indeed. And it was something, again, widely held in Japan, that there was still a strong feeling on the left that this was US imperialism and that Japan was sort of aiding and abetting it, even though it should have been, even though there's still a strong feeling that Japan was a victim of American imperialism and it shouldn't be a party to supporting US imperialism in Vietnam and Korea. That was the mindset. And, that was, again, it's hard to imagine Japanese feeling strongly about this sort of thing today, but it was really a thing. Which inspired Mick Jagger to write the song Street Fighting Man. Okay, I did not know that. So, yeah, that's fascinating. And I don't know who Tariq Ali is, by the way. I'm sorry, I probably should. But, it's fascinating. It's funny to make all the connections. Boom. Quinn Rankin, don't worry. You can't discuss politics in the USA anymore either. Quinn Rankin, I've noticed that. That's kind of a different direction, though. Japan kind of went Chinese Cultural Revolution. America just went full Jerry Springer, from what I can tell. It's just everybody being the most extreme version of every opinion over there. It's pretty sad, actually. Yeah, democracy had a good run, didn't it? Robert Brooker, I can assure you that we'll have a conversation about politics and world economy, and that will be wonderful. I look forward to it, Robert Brooker. Thank you for that. But yes, indeed, I think that's the basic rule is don't be a-holes. I think that's the main thing. If people can stick with that, it's Mr. Cordy Champ, sympathizing with North Korea. Well, bear in mind, in 1953, it wasn't clear-cut at all. I suppose in 1953, of course, you could look at it as America looked at it, that it was a proxy war between Stalin and and the United States. But there were a lot of people in Japan who viewed it very much as the South being a brutal, as South Vietnam was, a brutal American-backed dictatorship against domestic people who saw Kim Il-sung as a genuine, he was foreign-backed, but saw him as a genuine sort of liberation movement figure, like Ho Chi Minh. So people who were and remember as well that this was 1953. It was 8 years after Korea had been a part of Japan. There were many Japanese who were married to Koreans, who were born in Korea, who had had a lot of sympathy for Korea. It wasn't the relationship with Korea. Of course, it was an occupation of sorts. It was colonized by Japan, but it doesn't rule out the fact that there were a lot of people that actually genuinely felt support for Korea and its moves for independence and to avoid American dominance. So, yeah, there were a lot of people who genuinely saw North Korea, who still see North Korea today as a genuine, independence kind of a movement. Japanese people who support it for those reasons. So, yeah, it's not as surprising as you'd think. Actually. Naoto Kan, Prime Minister of Japan, he joined the Japan Socialist Party when it was in the 1970s, when it was still affiliated with the North Korean Workers' Party. It wasn't actually the Communist Party that was linked with the Korean Workers' Party. It was the Socialist Party. And we've actually had multiple prime ministers that have become prime ministers in the Socialist Party back in the day. Came close to gaining power, and they actually had political ties and did member of parliament exchanges with North Korea as late as the 1980s. So, North Korea is complicated. It really wasn't until they admitted to the abductions of Japanese civilians during peacetime, while there were all of these people who had all these positive ties and support for the North Korean government in Japan. It was really that admission about the abductions that really pulled the rug out from under people who sympathized with North Korea and Japan, and that whole thing ended. But it was actually not 50%, but it's probably a pretty safe 20 or 30% of the country genuinely sympathized with North Korea. So, yeah, not unusual at all, actually. At least until about 2000. Quinn Rankin, the US is not a democracy. Well, yes, it's... I won't go into this in detail. The term Republican gets used differently in different English-speaking countries, and it can be both. You can have a democratic system of government and still be a republic. Republic simply means not having a monarch in most of the world. But I know that gets sort of complicated. It's and I won't have the debate here. So yeah, I realize that many people point out America is not a democracy. They fight for democracy, they don't practice it. Yes. Sorry, my dad's military, by the way, so he said that and believed in it. Rambato, South Korea, only a real democracy since 1987. Hey, so same with Taiwan. I think 1989. I mean, but still 1987. That's a long time. North Korea is still trying to get up to the start line. So, been good since 1987, but, they had a rough time getting there. So, yeah. Anyway, next story. Wow, I thought I would struggle to get through stories. I thought I would go through quickly today, but I think that every week. The Sri Lankan death in immigration detention. So this continues to be pretty appalling. The death of Ratnayaka Yanaga Wishma Sandamali in immigration detention. Just to recap her story, she was in Japan studying Japanese on a student visa during COVID. She sought an extension. She overstayed her visa, basically. She stayed here, and when she was married to a Japanese. However, when she was suffering domestic violence and called the police on her partner, she was arrested as an overstayer. And was put into immigration detention. While she was in immigration detention, she had a brain hemorrhage at one point, and she sought medical attention. She asked for medical attention, and the guards in immigration detention in Nagoya ignored her request for medical assistance over a period of days, where she declined and basically increasingly became desperate, begging for medical review, and basically it was never given to her, and then she died while she was in detention. This is for overstaying a student visa during the pandemic. Yeah. Basically, the government, and the government had all of this on video camera. They actually was evidence of this. And again, the family accused basically the Immigration Service of Japan of basically bullying and mistreating her, negligently leading to her death. Given that she had clearly and apparently she had like blood coming out of her nose, and they thought she was faking it and was self-inflicted to get attention and to sort of get concessions. The guards didn't even refer her to a doctor. And this was so the family asked, again, as part of the investigation into the wrongdoing here, into why she was denied medical attention. They asked for release of the videos, which the government didn't do. They initially said to save the feelings of the family, but of course, it was just they didn't want to incriminate themselves. They finally did show 2 hours of the video, which was taken from a summary of 2 weeks of video. They showed it to the family. The family could only stomach watching half of it. The Minister of Justice also gave an apology the other day, saying that they were very sorry and they'll be looking at taking measures to prevent this sort of thing happening again. But again, I do not see how this is not a case of negligence resulting in death, which the idea of negligence being that you're doing something so wrong that it could obviously logically be seen to have led to the consequence that it did, which is the person dying. When someone's got blood coming out their nose and clearly has a medical condition and is being refused that medical treatment, and they're in detention in a government-run facility, denying the medical attention directly led to the death and was deliberate, was foreseeable. That's manslaughter. That's a form of murder, and how the Justice Minister and the people running the facility in Nagoya are not actually being arrested and charged with the equivalent of manslaughter for this, of negligence leading to death. I do not understand. The minister said that she's sorry and they'll try to make sure it doesn't happen again, but that doesn't seem to be the problem. The problem is that the staff is just basically, this is not different to this is not very far off that police officer putting the foot on the neck for 10 hours, for 10 minutes and killing that person, if you ask me. I mean, it's not directly murdering, but it's kind of doing something which can, through inaction, through knowing inaction, led to the death. So it's pretty outrageous, actually. And the family deserves huge credit flying out to Japan and demanding this justice. I mean, you can bet that the government was just hoping that the family was in some country far away and that this would all sort of disappear. But they didn't let that happen, and credit to the family, who are rightly outraged by this and, having trouble accepting the apology for a needless death of someone whose life was in the care of the Japanese Justice Ministry, and they took that life. They had absolutely no need for it, and it was absolutely preventable. Simply being allowed to see a doctor. I mean, she overstayed. She was studying Japanese. It was a student visa overstay. They gave her worse detention conditions and treatment. I mean, a murderer would have gotten better treatment than that. So, pretty horrific. Another story, another reason to just never mess around with, immigration in Japan. Don't bring weed into the country. Don't bring Adderall, in a Tylenol container like somebody did. You do not want to end up in immigration detention. It's hellish. I mean, the immigration, the Amnesty International has called out the Japanese standards, human rights standards for Japanese immigration are not up to acceptable standards that Amnesty considers for any country anywhere in the world, acceptable. They've called this out multiple times, and Japan hasn't improved on this. And these sorts of cases of deaths in detention, unfortunately, this isn't the only one. So, when the Justice Minister says, oopsie, I hope that this leads to more change than that. But more than that, it's crazy to me that there's no actually accountability for the people who are clearly responsible for this. I mean, if they say that this was due to a procedural issue, then it's the minister who's responsible, and the minister should be charged. But to me, it's actually the people who are staffing the detention center should have been responsible for this. They did make the excuse that with COVID-19 going around, they were afraid of trying to minimize contact with the detainees, so they didn't want to take them out of the cells. But which makes it even more inhumane, if you ask me. So a pretty outrageous case. And we'll see if any more comes of it. But clearly the government and prosecutors are not doing anything about this. But pretty awful case. So yeah, that's the story that happened. Is there something like sovereign immunity in Japan? I'm not sure that there's something like sovereign immunity in America. Sovereign immunity, that's when people get pulled over and then by police for speeding, and then they put a video camera and they say that I'm a sovereign individual, right? Something like that. Sovereign immunity, that's different to diplomatic immunity. But isn't that like where someone claims that they're not part of the country that they're in or something like that? I don't know. I'm not aware of anything like sovereign immunity as I've seen it being sort of thrown around on YouTube existing in Japan. Not that I'm aware of, Quinn Ragged, but yeah. Kerberos Tenshi, well, yeah. But if they, what if they offer a sincere apology? Can they be forgiven and we all forget about it? I think there's a difference between apology and justice. And this is part of the problem with things like dealing with First Nation grievances, where, it's funny. Often people, governments don't want to offer apologies for history because they're worried that could trigger liability. But I think those are different things. It's good in this case that there was an apology, but it still baffles me that this is basically a crime. Like, do you get off murder if you apologize to the family? Like, it's a separate thing. You should apologize to the family regardless, right? But the question of whether you've committed a crime and whether you're accountable to society for that is a different thing. So yeah, generally speaking, I think apologies are taken into account with things like sentencing. In any case, in this case, where it's actually the national government was in detention of this person, is that also sort of adds to the complexity of it, and certainly the need for the apology. But still, the question of accountability and justice for it, I don't know. I think I'm thinking of sovereign citizens, okay, which I have no opinion. The US has qualified immunity for some egregious acts. Okay, I'm sorry, maybe it's just I'm not familiar with the concept. Sovereign citizen, okay, thank you for the correction on that. Sovereign immunity is the British legal equivalent, says Christopher Luke. Thank you for that, Christopher Luke. I'm not exactly sure, but I think this is okay. So that's cases where where like a police officer is allowed to use deadly force under certain circumstances or some stuff like that, right? I don't think that immigration, detention officers have any sort of right in any country in the world to deny medical treatment to detainees. Even in freaking Guantanamo, even in Al Ghraib, they actually had obligations, and there was probably a doctor in Al Ghraib prison in Iraq. And that's the level of wrong here, I think. Is my read of the story. So yeah, crown immunity. Actually, I'm sorry, that makes more sense, Christopher Luke. Thank you for translating it for me. Yes, so crown immunity, yeah, that can exist in things like where, for example, when the state confiscates land or whatever, and they pass laws letting themselves off the hook for it. Yeah, but that doesn't normally extend to murder, and that wouldn't be upheld for manslaughter or wrongful death. That'd be a public policy exception to that. Yeah, death is pretty much an exception to like every type of protection that people get for that. But I'm not aware of that in Japan. Actually, I'm sure it exists, but I'm not aware specifically of that existing. Just for those interested, when I shared this, I went before getting my second Moderna shot, I went into the pharmacy and said, hey, everyone said I should go get some fever-reducing medicine. What should I get? And the pharmacist guy came out and actually walked me through and said, this is what you should get. Tylenol, by the way, is apparently the best thing, but you can't get it very easily in Japan. So where you can't get Tylenol, apparently you either get Eve or this. And I was told that this one has a stronger dose. There's actually like a premium version, which I went and grabbed. And he's like, no, do you not want the premium? You want this one. You want the regular one. It's just as good, and it's got the same dose of the stuff that you need. That one's just got other crap that does other things. You don't need it. Just get this. So I got this, and I actually did take one last night just to I was just feeling crappy all day. I was actually getting slightly better in the evening when I took one, and when I woke up in the morning I was totally fine. So I've heard some people say that this can be kind of rough, so I guess it can react differently for different people. But if you're at the pharmacy, if you're planning to get your second shot in Japan, and you want to get something for sort of fever and aches just to have for after that second shot in particular, apparently, this is one of the two. The other is called Eve, EVE. Best thing to do is do what I did. Just go talk to the pharmacist and say, hey, I'm getting a second vaccine shot tomorrow. What's the good stuff? And this is what they directed me to. But if you're looking around yourself, that's what I got. And yeah, I had pretty mild. I had 37.8 degrees, was about as bad as it got. Most of the day I was 37.5, so it was pretty much a low-level fever all day and just feeling kind of crappy. But yeah, I just took one, and it did the trick. I don't know if it actually did anything at all, but that's what I got. So just if people are interested in that and they're in Japan. No country in the world. Isn't there at least one? I'm sorry. I don't remember what you're referring to now with that, so I apologize. One that you're talking about that allows police to murder people. Well, I don't know. I mean, maybe there is one. I'm disconnected on what the point there is about. But yeah. But anyway, next story. Oh yeah, so this guy. Let me. This person, who Marcos. I'm trying to show his Twitter channel. This person makes logos for people, and he was just said, "Hey, can I make a logo for you?" And I'm like, "Sure," and he did. And they were this guy. I'm trying to show his Twitter handle. Where's his Twitter handle? Follow Marcos. Follow Marcos on Twitter. Just pinged me and said, "Hey, I'd like to make can I make a logo for you?" And he said, "Sure." And I said, "Sure." And he went and made these. And yeah, I thought it was pretty cool, actually. Probably not the sort of font I'd go for, but I still like the sense of the design. He realized right away the New Zealand flag kind of looked crappy, which I said, yeah, I think New Zealand has a terrible flag. So then he switched to like the sword. Oh crap! He switched to a sword motif, and I quite like. They're all sort of monotone, but with a little sword and the O and blogger underneath. The red one kind of grew on me. The blue one kind of pops out. But I thought these were quite cool. So, yeah, thanks a lot. Follow Marcos on Twitter. And, yeah, if you're interested in getting a logo made, hit this guy up. Anyway, I thought this was pretty cool. And I did appreciate the spontaneous gesture there. So, yeah. Make croaky. Let me have something to drink for a minute. Next story. Paralympics are about to start. Well, that's an awkward time. We're up to steady 5,000 cases a day. It's gone down a bit this week, where it's been sort of steady, but that's because this week has been a boom. It's been when people traditionally travel to their hometowns and take a week off work. It's like school holidays for kids, and during that time, it's often when people return to their hometowns to see their grandparents and attend family graves and whatnot. Again, all the governors saying, please don't travel for a bond, please don't do a bond this week, and everyone's saying, well, you just had the Olympics, so screw you, I'm doing a bond. So we had that's caused the numbers to be flat, but they're still going up alarmingly, and actually the medical system is pretty much now collapsing. I'll talk about that in a moment, but nonetheless, at the moment, it is, there still is no real serious talk about pausing on the Paralympics. I suppose what's in favor of it is that we saw the explosion in Delta cases happen during the Olympics here in Tokyo, and really the cases within the Olympics, particularly by foreign visitors, was actually remarkably low. So that sort of indicates the idea that by testing all the foreign visitors every day, they were more or less able to control what was going on, and that they could successfully manage a kind of an Olympic bubble without having actual guards, although they did catch people from the village. They caught the Georgian athletes going to Tokyo Tower. They caught Bach himself going to freaking Ginza after the event. But so although it was sort of a leaky bubble, they more or less sort of kept it together. And like I say, the foreign athletes were probably more in danger from the Japanese than the other way around. But all of that said, you have to ask again, is it really a good idea to the situation when they started the Olympics, like a week before the Olympics, was that there were like 1,000 cases per day in Tokyo. And it was going up steadily. Now the situation is that there's probably this week we're going to hit 6,000 cases a day. We could be up to 10,000 cases a day by the end of the month. The way things are going right now, it is still not really slowing down yet. I think the Sorbonne thing is just because people have been traveling, which is going to make it worse everywhere. And then it's going to come back. Everyone's going to come back and get tested when they get back to Tokyo. The medical system is collapsing. They're running out of hospital beds for people. And yet the Olympics pulled huge resources demanding access to hospice, to doctors and sports doctors and hospital beds for the athletes as well. So it would seem like a bad idea to have the Olympics, but it seems like an even worse idea to have the Paralympics. And while I'm sympathetic, it looks even worse, the idea that, the able-bodied athletes, it was okay for them, but we're going to be tougher on the disabled athletes because, it seems a bit ableist to sort of say that we should cancel the Paralympics but not the Olympics, when can't they be managed the same? But I'd say that the situation in Tokyo is materially different. That said, I actually think at this point that even if the situation was as bad as it is now before the Olympics, they still wouldn't have cancelled it, but they should have, just as they should have cancelled it when it was much better when they actually started the Olympics. But now it's like ridiculous, actually. Like when the medical system is not working, when there are actual cases that I'm about to start talking about where there are people now needing to be put into ICUs and they're being denied that because there are no ICUs available in Tokyo with beds for people that need to be put into emergency treatment. How can you allow a single bed for for a sports festival? So, again, nothing against the volunteers, nothing against the participants. And, again, if they have it, I wish them nothing but the best. But to the organizers and to the government, like this is nuts. It was nuts before, but it's like multiples of nuts now that they're thinking about going ahead with the Paralympics. So, that's what's going on with that. Quint Ranked, there appear to be more cases, but according to sources, deaths are at a lower rate. Deaths come at the end, but what's happening is that the serious cases, the rate of serious cases, like the proportion of serious cases to overall cases is much lower, but the number of overall cases is so high that now, so for example, we've only just in the last couple of days caught up to the number of serious cases that we had in the January wave. But in the January wave, we had 1,000, we got up to like 2,000 cases per day in the January wave, whereas we are now up to 6,000 cases, and we have the same number of serious cases. But the point is, like in January, we've run out of hospital beds. The other problem is that the serious ICU cases are at the same number, but the number of serious cases at a different level, there are like 4 stages of serious cases. People who are like one step below that are those numbers are very high. So, it's probably a reflection that there are more vaccinated people. And so there are more people, there are certainly far less elderly in ICUs. It's mostly people in 40s and 50s rather than 60s and above. The benefits of the vaccines are clearly visible in the distribution of numbers, but there are still a large number of people in cases requiring medical attention and requiring hospital beds, and those resources are completely filled up, as well as the ICUs now. So there's no capacity for taking any more. And the other problem, of course, is that it's not peaking yet. It still is going up. So the rates are better, but the overall numbers are now so large that even though the rates are better, it's still, in terms of death rates, death rates tend to, everything is a bit later. Like we've only just caught up on the serious cases. I presume that the deaths would come after that. But it's not so much a situation of loss of life. It's a situation of the medical system being unable to cope, and that will come first. So the situation still is objectively bad right now. I'm sure that we're getting better at treating it. And indeed, vaccinations are clearly making a big difference. It's why I'm very glad to be vaccinated, and I'm just going to stay here for 2 weeks until my 5G fully kicks in before I do anything. But even with all of that, the numbers, and this is what's scary about Delta. I think it's the case in the US as well, that the serious cases and deaths are much lower in places with high vaccination rates, but they still happen, and it still is something to be scared of. So but absolutely right, Quint Ranked, the rates are lower. Christopher Luke, it's not like they had years to plan for this or anything. Yeah, I mean, in fairness, the pandemic, well, even the pandemic now, they've had nearly 2 years, I suppose. But I still think the best thing all along would have been if they could have just delayed it to 2032. Dude Jericho, you've seen so many people talking with their masks on their chin, not wearing one at all. People in Tokyo don't seem to care anymore. I've seen other people talking about that, Dude Jericho. I have not been out very much. I went to Ikebukuro. When I went for my shot, I caught the train. And I came back through Ikebukuro, and I saw a couple of people on the train with masks around the chin. To me, the percentage, I was going, from Yamanote line from near Shibuya to Ikebukuro. And the number of people, or the percentage of people I saw not wearing masks, I would say would be less than like 2%. But they were around. I mean, I was around hundreds of people on that trip, and the people without them stood out. So I wouldn't say it was like everyone. That was my perception, at least of that route. I don't know what other parts of Tokyo are like. I didn't get out at Shibuya or at Shinjuku. I only went through the train in Ikebukuro. But yeah, you can certainly see people doing now. I don't feel like people have quite given up on masks. At least not what that I've seen. But there again, I never get on the train except for getting vaccination shots now. So where I go, people seem to be complying more or less. But, that's just where I am. Iraq299, good evening. I was popping in for a quick listen before getting an early night. Good on you. Good idea to have an early night. Big day tomorrow, Monday. Let's try to wrap this up. This was fascinating, by the way. Everyone knows about Chiune Sugihara, who is the diplomat who signed a lot of transit visas for Japanese to be able to for Jewish people to be able to escape Nazi-occupied areas, saved something like 6,000 Jews. However, there is a story of this person, General Higuchi Kiichiro, who I'd never heard of and apparently is less well known, but is credited with actually helping over 20,000 Jews escape, crossing from Russia, people who escaped basically towards the Soviet Union and were able to transit through Manchuria to China to Shanghai to be able to escape. Fascinating story. So he was actually an intelligence officer and a lieutenant general, so he was military. This is probably part of the reason it's thought that he was not quite as celebrated as the diplomat Sugihara. But the story of him is that when he was acting as an intelligence officer, he was actually stationed in Poland for many years, where he made friends with British intelligence people, as well as whenever he had to look for lodgings. Apparently people in Poland were generally kind of racist towards non-white people, but Jewish people would put him up. Also, when he was stationed in Vladivostok, he actually learned Russian from Jewish Russians. So actually became quite familiar with Zionist cause and with many Jewish people. And so when he was stationed basically as a military attaché on a border crossing with the Soviet Union in Manchuria, he actually apparently, the Manchurian government will not want to allow Jews to be able to escape and to transit Manchuria, but he said that they were worried about offending Germany and Japan. He said that Japan is not a vassal state of Germany, and it comes out that through his experiences in Eastern Europe and from his time in Russia, he abhorred the sort of anti-Semitism and racism of Germans and so on towards Jewish people, and he actually saved more Jews than Sugihara did. And again, this was something where he had, and it turns out that it was partly this and partly the fact that he was actually befriended British intelligence officials in Poland prior to World War II, that actually got him, he wasn't tried as a war criminal when they were sort of rounding up high-ranking intelligence, military intelligence at the end of World War II. He also apparently actually put out the strategy for preventing Stalin taking over Hokkaido, and prevented that successfully, sacrificing Sakhalin and of course the northeast territories. But interesting character, and interesting to read about how he was kind of very internationalized. He was based in Harbin, how he learned Russian, he boarded with Russians and Jewish Russians, and actually and rescued tens of thousands of Jews. So actually really interesting story. And when I tweeted about this on Twitter, there are some people from the Jewish community in Tokyo who apparently are aware of this person and his family. And a new story to me and one worth sharing. So I thought that was pretty good. I mentioned before, with the Olympics, the bubble seemed to be largely widely kept intact. And indeed, the bubble, if anything, was protecting the Olympics more than from Japan than the other way around. However, it turned out that just after the Olympics, they did announce this week that it turned out that right at the start of the Olympics, a lambda, the Peruvian strain, which is some people speculate is more vaccine resistant and more contagious even than the Delta variant, was found in quarantine at the airport. And the government never made an announcement of it. They made an announcement after the Olympics were done. They said, 2 weeks ago, we found our first lambda case in Japan. And the media was saying, well, why didn't you release it? And they were like, oh, we didn't want to release information about it till after the Olympics when people could focus on it more. We thought they'd be too distracted by the Olympics, so we didn't want to say it. Another person from the LDP actually said, if you had asked us, we would have told you. So, which is a pretty awful way of responding to that. But then it turns out a few days after that, they said, oh, and by the way, the person with the Lambda variant actually was with the Olympics. So if that caused that variant to get into Japan, which it sounds like it wasn't, it was isolated and quarantined and treated and whatnot, discreetly, obviously. But this was a case where the Japanese government proactively kept it secret. They deliberately did not release information that this had been found. And then even when they did, they even delayed a couple more days to mention, oh, and that person was with the Olympics. And it's not clear that it actually made it into the community in Japan, but pretty scary if it had. And honestly, even if that one case had gotten into the community in Japan, that pretty much would have undermined the success of managing, having the Olympics itself and the success of managing the bubble. So kind of scary, but yeah, that came out. Other vaccine news or Japan sort of COVID news. Japan has started issuing vaccine passports. Again, only a few countries accept them, and Japan doesn't accept them, and Japan doesn't offer reciprocity for any country that accepts them right now, so not really much point to it at the moment. But I'm expecting after the Olympics, Japan will probably start offering more travel, resumption of travel, probably first for business purposes and special purposes, but where you'll be able to use these vaccine passports. They are apparently right now A4 size sheets of paper, so it's not really clear how you're supposed to use them. But, of course, with what's happening in Italy and France, where they're actually using vaccine passports for getting into movie theaters and restaurants, I mean, that's pretty extreme. But my hope is that this will help me get back to take trips to Australia and New Zealand eventually. So when it's useful, I'll probably apply for one myself now that I'm double vaxxed. But yeah, baby steps. Now that this is out, I mean, right now it sounds like it's pretty ridiculous. Hopefully it'll become more internationally standardized, maybe become a stamp that actually goes in your passport, or digital, or whatever they're going to do with it. But that's now available, so that's a thing that happened. I'll come back to Kono, and I'll come back to that. This is talking before about, yes, indeed, that patients who should be being put into ICUs are being told to stay on hold at home because they don't have beds for them, which is pretty terrifying and shows really that the medical system's on the brink of collapse. A couple of other quick stories that, yes, apparently people who came for the Olympics and discovered Japan's washlet toilets are like causing a revolution of people wanting to get these. And honestly, that's why I can't travel. Not having these sorts of toilets is like the hardest part for me of going to Australia or New Zealand or America. It feels like probably traveling back in time. And I mean, what did people do in like the 16th century? Because they didn't even have toilet paper in those days, right? I mean, what did they do? Christ, I mean, that's what it feels like when I go back to America now. So yeah, I'm glad that people in the world are learning that it's actually good to wash yourself before you wipe yourself. And finally, with I just mentioned before about Suga's popularity tanking, and one of his main rivals is Taro Kono, who is the current vaccine minister, that guy there on the left. His father was actually a prime minister of Japan. In fact, actually gave the Kono statement, saying sorry to South Korea for the comfort word, which of course went really well. But he's just published his book, his sort of like his personal vision for a future for a new generation of political leadership in Japan. Which is kind of appropriate because he's the son of a sort of a dynasty of politicians. But some people are saying that they don't think he's actually aiming for being prime minister in September because no one really wants that poison chalice right now. But he's clearly stating his intentions that he's aiming to become prime minister one day. It'll be interesting to see if he does actually throw his hat in the ring to go against Suga, given how unpopular Suga is, but also would you want to when pretty much whoever gets into this role is going to be really unpopular. To me he's an interesting character, and if I had to pick from people inside the LDP right now, there's not many that I would pick, but there are people I like a lot less than Taro Kono, so that's an interesting one. And that is all the stories. Lysander 45, I have to use toilet paper like a savage. Yes, that is right. Dude Jericho, also good to see you, Dude Jericho. Long time no see, actually, if you are the Dude Jericho that I remember. Good to see you in the comments there. That is all the stories. It is late. 16th century had water buckets to clean your behind. if they did, then they're probably ahead in many ways of today, except I don't want to think about that too much. Anyway, look, thanks everybody for keeping me company. As always, we're 10 minutes over as always, but really enjoy checking in with you all. Thanks everyone for the comments and so on. And yes, 10 minutes over. And look, have a good week, everybody. Stay safe, take care of yourself. Stay away from the Delta variant, wear a mask, do all that good stuff, and follow me on Twitter. Remember, I'm here at 10:30 p.m. Japan Standard Time every week. I've got nowhere else to go. I'll see you all next week, and take care, everyone. I see Barry Convex there. Has any country confirmed that they will accept the vaccine passport? Yes, there are a couple that have accepted Japan's passport. I can't remember exactly. They were like Poland, Turkey, Azerbaijan or something. There are a couple of countries, but no places that I would want to travel to. And again, it's not reciprocal. So I think after the Olympics, when they make it hopefully reciprocal, that will open up some more. But keenly waiting for a solution for my Vaxxed friend traveling to Japan from UK. So for that, check out Ninja Monkey. He's got the best channel for monitoring Japan prospects of travel to Japan. Every week he puts up a really detailed update on what's happening with that. Ninja Monkey, all is one word. Definitely go and check out that channel. Alex, thank you for the heart. I do appreciate that. Thank you everybody for joining me and keeping me company. I'll see you all next week. Remember, follow me on Twitter. Like the video if you liked it. I do appreciate that. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. It does help. And mask or mash or do all that stuff to the like button. I'll see you next week. Have a good week, everybody. Boom. Peace.